because of younger girls. It's not the men's fault. It has nothing to do with the men that won't date them. It only has to do with these younger girls, which is obviously a very convoluted and problematic mindset. And that really begins this trend throughout the show of romanticizing men and demonizing women, specifically demonizing women through women. And even into the middle of the series, season 4, episode 11, Coulda, Woulda, Shoulda, this is one of the first times we see consumerist ideals be relayed to viewers as they tell women what they need to wear and own to be women, which my colleague Jackie will develop on much more in her part of the presentation. And lastly, the concluding 2 seasons of season 5 and season 6 both see the 4 main girls begin to attack and cannibalize each other as they start to reach the end of their plot lines. So it's worth noting that each of the 4 girls was told that they needed to have a husband, kids, and a home to be happy, not a job, not independence, not any of those things, just a man. And as the girls started to get married and the show started to wrap up, we've seen them start to turn on each other and almost self-cannibalize as a friend group. Specifically the characters of Charlotte and Samantha, who are propped up as the conservative and the liberal of the friend group, consistently attack each other and weaponize their existences and morals at the expense of one another. So this moves into our gender result of the 4 archetypes. And we recognize that throughout the whole series, the 4 archetypes of the characters were utilized to not only relate to the largest market share and largest audience, but they were also used to reinforce forms of gender and perceived gender ideals. So even if you were a much more traditional woman, well, you might not agree with the characterization of Samantha, but the character of Charlotte exists to pull you in. And if you are a much more liberal woman, you might not agree with Charlotte, but Samantha pulls you in. So it was a strategic deployment from the producers to ensure that they related to each kind of woman that they perceived existed in 1990s Manhattan. So more specifically, Carrie Bradshaw, the main character, right here, Sarah Jessica Parker, is portrayed as the all-American girl next door. She's naive, she's carefree, she's unaware, usually to a fault. Her best friend Miranda is the businesswoman, successful, independent, lonely. And what's more important is they prop up this loneliness as a direct cause, like as a direct of effect of her success. So long as she's a successful lawyer, she owns her own home, all those things, she'll never have a husband. And there's even some episodes where they directly say men are intimidated by her. And as noted, Samantha is the sexually liberated, modern, liberal, and shameless friend, and Charlotte is the virginal proof friend, playing the much more traditional, conservative, and shame-filled role. So when we concluded that gender was definitely present, it was definitely ideological as it upheld patriarchal beliefs, we wanted to turn to that question of why. Why would producers willfully include such problematic vantage points, and why would they routinely throughout 6 seasons cling to these 4 archetypes? And obviously there's the sociological benefits of fine-tuning behaviors, reinforcing your power, especially if you're a power holder in society or a man in society. And there's all the sociological benefits, but we also figured it was worth noting that in the ever capitalistic 1990s, there was also a series of economic factors, which my colleague Jackie will develop upon.
So we know that gender was ideologically depicted in the series, but our question is why? And we believe that was done in order to drive profitability in mass media and to create and inspire an overall culture of consumerism. Now, in order to test out our thesis, we had to revisit the episodes as well as the first movie. And these are the episodes that we visited, we fine-tuned it, we revised it, we analyzed it, and these are our findings. So when we're talking about a culture of consumerism, we have to look towards the main character, Carrie Bradshaw. She was the main vessel for the franchise to really fine-tune their own narratives and explore the different themes that they wanted to through Carrie Bradshaw. So we can see that Carrie Bradshaw was kind of like this prototype for influencer marketing. Now, influencer marketing is probably a form of marketing that you are all most aware of. It's the type of marketing where celebrities, YouTubers, Instagram influencers, anyone really that's in the public eye uses when they endorse a product. Now, the catch is that this form of marketing only really works insofar that the audiences trusts the influencer. And the franchise knew this very well, that there had to be this kind of trust level that had to be established between the audiences and the influencers. And so the franchise was able to strategically place products in a way that was strategic to the show overall. And this was done in order to, in a way that products became characters of their own. They sort of lived in tangent with the culture of the characters as well as its audiences. And we can see this through the personification of the products, especially through the personification of the purses. In season 3, episode 17, Carrie is quite literally held at gunpoint by a robber, in which he says, "Drop the bag." And she goes, "Oh, this isn't a bag, it's a baguette." In season 4, episode 11, Samantha makes it this big ordeal to get this $9,000 Birkin bag, as she equates it with the fact that once she finally gets this big red Birkin bag, that she'll finally made it. She's finally successful. She goes in the store and she talks to the sales clerk, in which the sales clerk tells her it's a 5-year waiting list. She tells him, "For a bag?" He goes, "It's not a bag, it's a Birkin." Now, why? Why refer to these materials with the respective names? What was the importance of that? Well, it really indoctrinates the idea that these objects must be treated with a sign of respect and superiority, in the same way that you would refer to your family members or your friends or your colleagues with their respective names, was the same way that these characters would refer to their own materials with their respective names. And we can see the level of product placement being so ingrained within the series through the fact that these product placements had their own narratives and storylines. Products such as Manolo Blahniks, Louboutins, and Fendi baguettes were an essential prop in Carrie's world. In Sex and the City, the movie, Mr. Big proposes to Carrie in the best way he sees fit, which is with the famous blue Manolo Blahnik stiletto. And this was kind of like an ode to the audiences that this Manolo Blahnik was a very important product to Carrie, because it played in the major milestones of her life, as well as the Vivienne Westwood wedding gown. In the beginning of the movie, she tells her friends that she's going to get married in a labelless dress, to which her friends kind of treat it as the most criminal offense one can do, because getting married in a dress that doesn't belong to a designer is very alien to them. In the movie, she gets invited by Vogue to be part of a segment of the last single girl that gets married at her age. And in the Vogue shoot, they have this whole photo shoot of all these different designer wedding designers' wedding gowns, from Oscar de la Renta to Christian Dior, Christian Lacroix, and of course, Vivienne Westwood. Finally, Vivienne Westwood gifts her this one dress, and she kind of opens the box in her apartment, and she kind of becomes almost teary-eyed, and it's this very fairy tale fantasy moment for her. Not only is she getting married, but she's getting married in a Vivienne Westwood wedding gown. Carrie describes the dress as being a dress so special it could wring a wedding tear from even the most unbelieving of women. So we see that there is this very emotional investment with the products placed in this series. The relationship between fashion and audiences was an emotional investment. And the franchise was very strategic in the way that it presented the ideological conceptions of how fashion is interwoven with the stages of a woman's life cycle. And this was integral to the show's success, creating that emotional investment, being that these major milestone moments had to be with the most luxe products out there. And of course, this theme was used in order to empower women, but they kind of took the lens of empowering women who participated in femininity, as long as it was done through excessive consumption. And so how does gender ideology tie into that? Well, it really inspires the function of the rediscovery of the feminine pleasures of consumption. So our question was, how effective were these product placements? Did they work? Did it drive profitability in mass media? And we believe that absolutely, yes, it did work. No matter how successful a brand or a company was, a subtle product placement would skyrocket sales. So Fendi, we know now, is a very successful fashion house. At the time, in the 90s, it was a struggle. It was struggling. It was actually on the brink of bankruptcy, until it was seen on the right-hand shoulder of Carrie Bradshaw. Manolo Blahnik was a Spanish fashion designer that wasn't quite yet recognized by the Western world until it was featured in the show. Magnolia Bakery was a small-town bakery in Greenwich Village that hadn't really gained any recognibility until it was seen in the show, and it kind of became an overnight sensation. And almost 16 years later, it even remains as a tourist spot for visitors to come to. And brands all over the world recognize the power that this franchise had. So brands from Mercedes to Sky Vodka to Swarovski crystals and even vitamin water were competing to place their products and in the series and in the movies. And so the series and the franchise kind of gained this popularity for being like the Super Bowl for women. Now, who else or what else other than New York City being able to profit off of this franchise? It's no coincidence that the first movie, the opening dialogue, is Carrie Bradshaw saying, year after year, 20-something women come to New York in search of the two L's, labels and love. New York City procured hundreds of millions of dollars in expanded revenue throughout the 2000s due to the heavily romanticized edit it received on the show. And almost 16 years later, New York City tourists visit the city for tours of the show's famous locations. Now, what else came about this franchise? Well, it actually resulted in the birth of a new genre, this new kind of like subgenre of the New York City female-led fashion-based products throughout the 2000s. And we've seen this through TV series such as Gossip Girl, movies such as The Devil Wears Prada, Confessions of a Shopaholic, and even in reality TV series such as Desperate Housewives. And of course, we can't forget the Carrie Diaries, which was a reanimation of Sex and the City, which was targeted towards a younger audience.
So with all that in mind, we opted to conclude on just reflecting on our limitations as well as future research that could be taken from here. So predominantly, one of our major limitations that we wanted to maybe work on in a future paper or reflect upon would be any personal biases or any negations of objectivity. So anytime we got subjective or allowed personal opinions to intervene, we would love to reflect on that in future works as we think it could be beneficial. And I would also personally like to account for the positionality of my vantage points and my colleagues' vantage points throughout the stages of the paper. As I found I went into it with a very romanticized edit as someone who viewed it a few years ago, and that was my main perceptions of it. And then as I did the research and found out that these things were being willfully included and problematic depictions were a part of it intentionally, it definitely changed my positionality and perceptions of the series. So kind of that before, during, and after would also be, I think, a very cool and academic introspection. And for future research, we do think that this show is in a very interesting place as it is getting the HBO follow-up next year. And that provides the unique opportunity to compare the series, exact same characters, producers, writing teams, city, everything, just 3 decades apart. And you can compare what ideological depictions are included, what aren't, why, and it just opens up a major door for comparative studies. And we did find that there was a lack of research with Sex and the City, especially considering it played such a foundational role and was so popular and had such a high viewership, being the most watched TV show at one point. So we definitely do think that there's a lot of room for future research and that the new series really does bolster that. But all things considered, that is the conclusion of our presentation. We hope that ideological gender depictions, both in Sex and the City and television in general, can be conveyed, as well as the usage of consumerism to drive cultures and profits for different actors and different avenues. And we would also like to just extend a very special thank you to Professor Demulin. I can say personally, our group emailed her at all hours of the day, numerous times this semester, and she always found time to answer us, set up a Zoom call, get us resources. She even went out of her way to find us resources to include in our papers. So just thank you so much for all of the aid and support you gave us there. I have put both of our contact information as well as pictures if anyone has any future questions or would like a reference list. But with that in mind, I think we're going to transition to questions from the floor if there are any.
All right, thank you, Will and Jacqueline, for opening up this panel. We have time for one question for now after each presentation, and then at the end of the panel, we'll be able to open the floor for multiple questions if there are any additional ones. So I do see that there was a question from Louise in the chat, so perhaps we can take that one. Louise asked, what are you expecting for the new series, and how do you think these depictions that were the core of the series will be updated?
So that's a great question, Louise. I want to thank you for sending it to us. I'm not sure if you've seen any of the things or press releases that have come out about the new series, but very interestingly is the most modern character, so Samantha, is not returning to the show. So that immediately did make us wonder, if the show has all these issues inherently and is losing its most modern, liberated character, what will that mean for this new release? Thankfully, what has come out is the producers have gone forward to say that their plan is to recast the character character of Samantha with a younger, more diverse role. So they're hoping to bring in a new character, just one, which is hopefully going to be enough to freshen up the show while also maintaining a lot of those core foundations that all of us have come to love through the other three main characters. So we're hoping through the role of a younger, diversified, they did say that they will be casting a woman of color. So hopefully that'll add a new, diverse and modern role for the show, and that character can breathe in that fresh air as well as maintain a lot of the things that we did come to love from the original.
Absolutely. I think like the series was also such a product of its time. It got a lot right, but it also got a lot wrong. So I think like there's going to be more definitions of what it means for every single character in their own respective personalities. But also I think that the franchise was so successful in their product placements. I think that that's also going to stay there. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I absolutely think that they are aware of the impact that they had. Like, of course, that they were big for all the revolutionary changes that it had, but I think that they also owe it to the new viewers now to really update on the things that they did get wrong.
Great. Thank you again, Will and Jacqueline, for being the first presentation on this panel. I'd like to invite Haley Culkin and Georgia Owens up next.